I'm Elise Dewsberry from New Musicals Inc., the producers of the web series So Proudly We Hailed. I'm here today with J.A. Moad II, who is the subject of our episode titled You and Judy and Me. So, Jay, I know that you're a former Air Force C-130 pilot with over 100 combat sorties. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you decide to sign up in the first place and why the Air Force? And tell us a little bit about your service.
Why I decided to join the Air Force first. Okay, so my father was a Vietnam vet, and he used to talk about all his experiences when I was a kid growing up and all the places he'd been. And of course, he left out all the bad things about being a combat veteran in Vietnam that slowly surfaced over the years. But his experience and his enthusiasm for certain things about the military fascinated me as a kid, and I think it was just kind of something that sat there and lingered. And I found out about the Air Force Academy, and I also found about West Point and Annapolis, and those seemed like some interesting options. But I remember my father saying, if you're going to join the military, the Air Force is the way to go. He remembered seeing the Air Force guys in Vietnam who would walk into the air-conditioned buildings, whereas they were sleeping in tents and having to dig their own toilets. So that was interesting right there. And you might hear my dogs barking in the background here. But that and the idea just of being a pilot and seeing the world, that really just grabbed onto my imagination as a 16-year-old kid. And the idea of just seeing the world was really fascinating. So I figured airplanes was a nice way to do it instead of, on a boat or something like that.
Oh, thanks. And I know that your relationship with your dad and the Air Force are also very much part of the story that you decided to tell. And we actually did an earlier version of your story, and at that point it was titled just Judy and Me. And then after we completed that, you joined our core curriculum here at NMI and went through the core and wrote your own 15-minute musical, and then went through our first draft curriculum and wrote the first draft of a full-length musical. And then after that, we decided to come back and revisit your veteran story and give you a chance to tell it again with a new team. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like going through the programs at NMI and how that might have affected how you approach the retelling of the re-examination of your story?
So I think, the whole 15-minute program, creating that 15-minute musical was just this great introduction. I wrote the first one really not having an idea at all what I was doing. And I wrote not only the story, but the lyrics. The narrative is my specialty. That's something I've done. I've written a lot. But in terms of trying to convey it through lyrics, initially I wrote the entire piece in a kind of lyrical style, just so we could discover what to do with it, because I wasn't sure what I was doing. And of course, that piece was done. And I worked with trying to think of his Philip, and so Philip and Philip, I think his background was a little bit more in opera, and he was not picking up on some of the subtle things that I was doing in there with playing with lyrics and playing with old stories. And of course, it was on Zoom. It was during COVID. It was a very difficult time, and I didn't really know what I was doing either. So, especially in terms of the lyrics. But going through that 15-minute musical course, it really opened my eyes to the importance of how lyric convey the stories, and in a way that's more important than you really think about when you don't know that. So when I was given the opportunity to come back to it, it was 2 years later, in between the time my father had passed away. So it was effectively a new story. And I worked with your producer Scott, and he thought I should bring more of my father into it. And I mentioned a story to both him and Kurt Kuhn, who's the composer, about reading a play to my dad that I had written when he was in a coma. And they were they just stopped and looked at me and said, well, that's where your story has to be. So they really brought out that the portion of my father in a new way. So it allowed me to add to the lyrics, elevate the story in a new way, trim back, and do things that I learned from the 15-minute program and through core as well. Through the first draft program as well. All those things, it allowed me to edit it and bring it and make it tighter in the focus. So that was it was a big learning curve, and I'm still learning. I still don't know what I'm doing in many respects, but maybe one day I will. So.
But this time around too, what you got the opportunity to do, Jay, was to see an actual performance of this piece live at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. Now, how did that feel, and how was that different from the filmed version?
Yeah, that was powerful. Of course, I would have loved to have been there and been involved in the process, but fortunately, I think the director had a pretty good sense of what we were doing, and I did talk to them a little bit. It, yeah, to see me portrayed on stage is always, is interesting. But I thought they did a fabulous job with it, and it really brought me to tears because it put me in contact with the story from a distance, so that I could see it. And I've shared the video version that's out there right now online with several colleagues, and I've had a great response. And I always say, well, that's good, but seeing it live on stage brings a whole new element to it. So I felt really fortunate to be able to come out and see that, and that it was a part of the Fringe Festival, and that we were part of the winning program made it really even more special, right?
Yes, it was a great experience. And part of the reason, Jay, that you were able to come out and see it is because you currently work as a commercial airline pilot. So you want to tell us a little bit about the going from the Air Force to commercial airline and what that's like being a commercial pilot.
Yeah, the military's flying is very different. You're doing much more interesting and fascinating things, and the job is really focused on mission oriented things, getting that job done, whereas the airline business is all about just moving people, obviously, but moving them in a timely manner. And I enjoy the flying because it gives me a chance to travel all over the country, to stay in different places, to see different things. In fact, I just had a layover in New York 2 days ago, and I saw a play, which was great. And so I regularly bid trips to New York where I can see shows and see friends there. Um, and but I would say the problem for me, the one downside of the airline business is it's very focused on time, getting things done, moving, and it doesn't lend itself to that creative side of me. So, fortunately, I've got things like MMI and other writing projects that I've been doing to keep that creative side engaged.
And is that how you see yourself continuing, Jay, with having the commercial airline job, but also being able to mix in that your writing and other projects?
Yes, definitely. In fact, I'm getting ready to go to training in January. I'll be training, and I'll be doing larger airplanes. I'll be flying international much more. So I'll be overseas quite a bit. But those trips tend to be longer trips, but you also have longer downtime. Like a 24 hours off in Paris, Amsterdam, London. You get to all these places I've been multiple times through my years of traveling, but there's not. I do find that I can write on the road. When I'm out there, if given the time. In the domestic world, sometimes you're only in a place 12, 13 hours, so you're just recovering at that point until your next day of work. But I definitely see myself continuing to write and doing the international thing, and we'll see what happens. Like I said, I still feel like I'm a big novice, learning and growing. So, yeah.
Can you tell us about any of the projects you have coming up?
So I just had, in fact, I was just in LA about a month ago. My wife had a yoga conference, so we went out there for that. But it was also to do a podcast of Act Two of the play Outside Paducah, which I performed in New York. And so we did a podcast of that. And they're also going to do a podcast of Act One, which they have an actor in LA who's doing that, a younger actor, because it's actually a young boy who plays that part. But I did play all three parts on stage in New York, so that was interesting. But we won an award out there, and I got nominated for Outstanding Solo Performance. So it was a great experience. There's nothing like writing and performing your own work to teach you to trim dialogue and narrative down. That was the best experience for that right there, if nothing else. And so I'm working on that. I've got ideas for a whole other play. I've stepped back from the musical that we did, which Club Caro, and I've been letting it sit for a few months, but I've been slowly editing and things are coming back to me now, to trying to fix some of the things, make it better. To be honest, I'm probably only happy with 5 songs in the entire, 20 songs that we did. But the goal really from the outset was to push hard and to see how much we could get done. And it's hard working with a collaborator in Los Angeles when you live in Minnesota. But we did the best we could, and yeah, it was a great experience. I learned tons in the process, and I, you know, I got enough positive feedback that it keeps me interested. So we'll see what happens. I am thinking about collaborating with a lyricist as well as someone else in the future. So, and reworking little bits and pieces of the story. So, yeah.
Well, as you know, writing is rewriting, and so
Yes.
that's always part of the process, part of the learning process. So
I
we're
could,
glad
I
you
get
get the chance to do that.
well, some of my mentors used to say, after you finish something, you literally put it in the desk for like 2 months and then don't even look at it or think about it. Even we're going to a different project and a new project and then come back to it. It gives you fresh, you need that distance, right? And so you never have distance when you're fully engaged in the moment. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Jay. And is there anything else that you want to say, perhaps in the about just the whole process of telling your story as a veteran and getting that out into the world, so that people can learn more about what veterans go through?
It's for my story in particular. I'm I didn't really feel like it was as much of my veteran story as my father's story of his being a veteran. A little bit about mine, but another project I've been involved with for probably 10 years now is a project called Veterans Voices, and they do a lot of stuff in New York with sharing veteran stories and getting them to perform. And in fact, I speak regularly on the topic about the importance of sharing their stories, of bearing witness. Um, in fact, I just spoke a few weeks ago at a local Unitarian church, talking about the importance of speaking out, as sharing your stories as a veteran is is a patriotic act in itself. Because to keep it silent is to not share that experience with the world. And I would say the Greeks a long time ago were sharing their stories. Veterans would perform on stage to the society to share these stories of what they'd experienced. So it's an important thing. We need to understand. We need to educate society on these things. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jay, for your service and also for sharing your story. I think those things are all very important. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing the new episode, You and Judy and Me.
All
Thank you.
right, great. And thanks for all the work you guys are doing with vets. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.